Hey guys, it's Wolfie. So I wanted to break down some decodes for you guys today. Everybody's got their own interpretation of what's going on, and more than anything else, I just want to be a guide. I want to be sort of a neutral ground, a place where people from all different walks of life can come and try to figure out where they fit into this thing. And I think I'm more of a translator and a communicator and a medium more than anything else. But right now, there's so much different stuff going on, and so many different people have interpretations of what they think is going on. I just wanted to kind of give you my take on a few things that I think are not clear. And again, I've been struggling to find my place in all this and figure out where I belong. But really, I think I'm supposed to be sort of a rock for translation, okay, and a person who's not going to judge, depending on if you come from one place or another place. I'm really here to help to help everyone figure out what all this means to them. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to hit me up in the comments or private message me or whatever. Anything I can do to help you guys is more than welcome if you want to address me directly. So, talking about everything, there's all this talk about space, there's all this talk about aliens, there's all this talk about angels and corruption and wars and rumors of wars, and kind of keying in on what I was talking about at the last video. We're really in the period that people call revelations, right? Like, that much is obvious. But I think we've gone through a lot of it already, and this video isn't really going to be explaining about revelations, because that's a whole different topic. That's a whole different apple tree, so to speak. And I think to talk to the whole Catholicism and Christian side of thing, that'll have to be a video in itself. But it is all related. Everything that's going on right now, you talk about bloodlines, you talk about religion, you talk about Egypt, you talk about Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and Mormonism and LDS and all these other things, and then you look back at like the Incas, and you look at the Mayans, and you look at the empires of Byzantine and Rome, and you look at like what happened in Phoenicia and Tyre and in Mesopotamia and all these things, and in Canaan, and all these things have common traces, right? Like, they all have things that relate to each other, where I think we've all, no matter what culture you're part of, they all pick up something in that story, and you become part of this great family tragedy. Really, it's a combination of a tragedy and a mysterious, wondrous story. It's a bit like a romance tragedy, right? A little bit like Romeo and Juliet. And every one of us are like a color in the rainbow, where along the way, some point in history, on Earth at least, like, our families picked up part of the thread. Well, you guys got to understand one really important basic fact, okay? Earth is super young, and we have not been here the longest by a long shot. Like, there's so many other races, most of which are animal in nature, right, that were developed on other planets, that became part of the Earth's sort of terrarium project. Like, terrarium as in like Terraria, or Terran, or terrestrial. Like, this place is like a melting pot, literally, for all the creations in the universe, and it's sort of been a combination of a garden and a prison. That's just the way it is, a garden and a prison, because the creatures that have been put here, a lot of them have been very powerful, and animals are super powerful, and we don't even realize it. And that's going to be part of the awakening, I think, of this earth, is how animals have been sort of simultaneously very powerful and very suppressed, and as they awaken, and I think many of you know what I mean, like, you're going to see how animals have a greater and greater role in what's going on in the future, because like with telepathy and psionics and ESP, this is, animals communicate with that for a long time, and now there's many of us that are awakening to the fact that we can communicate with animals in the same way, and especially birds. Like, birds are so obviously awakened, and if you just sit and listen to birds, you can start to figure out that they're speaking to you now, and you can actually hear what they're saying, many of us. And just try it sometime. You might be surprised, or whistle to a bird and think about what you're saying while you're whistling it, and you might be surprised if you get a result. The same thing can be said of dogs. Like, a lot of things with dog and cat can be communicated with eye contact without saying a single word, and that's a known fact. And it's getting more and more obvious how these things are related. So animals have kind of been here on Earth for a long time, and some of them in the past, I think, for various reasons, were a bit they're a bit naughty, right? Like, so they did some things, and many of them had some of their power stripped from them, and this is where the true story of like the twin flames that Zeus created supposedly, and all these other things come into play, because many animals are already completed vessels, like they're already 100% evolved pretty much to their point for their function in the grand scheme of things, and they're sort of waiting for humanity to catch up, because humanity, although we're like the ultimate avatars, we're like the ultimate vessels in these great Cadillacs of avatars, like we're also the most emotionally confused, and like we're the most longing to find out who we are, right? And why is that? We're like these very complicated beings that have all these different sort of animals working inside of us in coordination in order to make our bodies possible. And all of these things are part of the living earth, right? And even if you don't believe in anything spiritual, think about this. Everything on earth is alive, and everything has like an electromagnetic field, and we all connect to it, right? We all connect to each other. And we don't maybe know all the different things that are going on because we haven't measured them or cared to measure them really. But the truth is we're all connected to each other through different types of fields which communicate different things between our bodies that we may or may not be aware of, that help to create the ebb and flow of our universe. And all this stuff becoming in alignment, underneath the surface, like the body may not even know, like the conscious ego, the person may not even know that a lot of this has been going on, because the body has sort of been independent of us for such a long time. Really, the body sort of like operates on its own, right? Like you don't think about what's going on in there. It's just its own thing. It's like its own animal, and sometimes we just abuse it and don't care about it and just totally forsake it. And really, this is the sort of like a sarcophagus for our soul that we have to take care of, because it houses our soul. And the people of Egypt would know a lot about that. You can see in the artwork and in the way that they carried on their tradition, like they cared very much about the remnants of the body, and like taking care of that, because it housed a lot of what was going on. And so humans today are very separate from their bodies, and I think part of this new earth transition is for our bodies and what we would call our mind to unite as one through what the Eastern people call like the chakra system, or the spinal column, or the tree of life, or whatever tradition you come from. The idea is you become awakened within your body and start speaking to your body in a way that you didn't before, and actually recognizing it as a life form, sort of apart from yourself, but within yourself, that you're sort of like in symbiosis with, okay? And, I think it's really a dangerous thing to start labeling, things as like lower self and higher self, because it's such a misunderstood term. Like, it's all yourself, if you think about it. Like, everything in the world is some extension of ourself, as though we're all connected in some big string, right? And to make things simple, you could almost kind of look at it like that. Like, the world is a complicated place, a very complicated place. But if you want to take anything super complicated and start with the number 8, you could break everything down into 8 great groups, okay? So there could be like 8 great things in your body, 8 great functions. There could be 8 great belief systems, maybe 8 great schools. There could be 8 great nations. There could be 8 great like types of energy, or maybe color. So like if you did Roy G. Biv, and if you added black and white, like you could have 8. There's all different kinds of things, but if you want to make something simple, you can just say, okay, there's 8 of them. Well, the entire universe is like a big orchestra. Like, everything in the universe is like a big orchestra. And just to kind of get to the topic of scale and microcosm and macrocosm and manifestation, because this is a really misunderstood thing. Like, there's so much in the world going on that we don't see. So much going on that we don't see. And the world is sort of recreated through light, countless times every day. It's as though, like, you think of all the kingdoms and all the elements that make up the world, right? Let's just say 8, right? Let's say there's, like, wind and water and sun and rock and plant life and animal life and light and variety of things like this, right? So all these things work in coordination. Each one is sort of like a miniature collective consciousness. It's like a family. Every one of these great elements is like a family, and they all talk the same language, right? And they have a tradition, and they have their own beliefs about how they need to do things. And this is what creates my definition of what a religion really is supposed to be. I think religion was a very misunderstood term. I think we got it mixed up because of language. And I think religion is more of like family culture within a group that's like an element of society or religion or existence, is more of like a tradition that you carry out to be part of your family in the world, whatever that world is for you, in whatever part of the world it is. So if you're more of like an avian type family or an avian type creature related to birds, singing and communication and mathematics and things like this, and motherly natures, and like all these things are related to like the avian race, right? And then you think about like the Lyrian race, right? Like the Lyrian race is more like feline in nature, and it's more about like collecting things and artifacts, and it's more about like singing and dance and what they call being lyrical and melodies, and like using the interplay between rhymes and melodies in order to do different things with communication. And then you think of like Syrian, like the dog star, right? And like dogs are very much like social creatures, and you look at Egypt, and there's a lot of people who are wearing dog helmets and like dog masks, like Anubis, and Set is almost more like a jackal, or like even like a mule. But it just depends. Like they're all very much related, and they all have their own flair, and they all have their own like sort of belief systems, and these all relate to different religions in modern times. You're going to find out all of these different alien races that we hear about, right, are really a combination of angels that we think of as angels, which is an sort of like an earthly interpretation of what's going on, versus spirits from like the underworld, so creatures who have been part of the circle of life and passed on, and their spirits live on through the underworld, sort of like in a way that like the Vikings and the Egyptians held belief in, like the underworld, where all the spirits were waiting there until the end times. That's kind of what's going on there. And then also, like with the, well, because we talked about Sirius, the dog star, we talked about Lemuria. Arcturia is more related to, like, the Anunnaki and the collectors and the people who are, like, the archivists, right? Like, they collect all the materia like bone collectors would, right? And they store all the genetic stuff out of time and all the bloodlines so that all these things can be preserved and remembered, and we can never lose any of them. And this is where like the Saturnalian brotherhoods come in, and like storing memories in ice around Saturn and things like this, and messing with sand, like sand planets, in order to like store memories within light and sand and bring them back and create like living sand sculptures, which is where like the Sphinx in Egypt came from. And there's a couple of those throughout the universe. But all these things are all working together to manifest. And if you go out to the edge of the universe, it gets very cold, right? And things move much slower, and they can be in much smaller scale. And creatures which are very, very tiny that live at the edge of the universe, and you can call them microbes or viruses, you can call them nanobot particles, you can call them living mercury or fifth element particle or God particle, whatever you want to call it. It's just living materia which has sort of been transported out to the edge of the universe and stored in like a crystalline state, right? Like gematric, as I call it, or it's like a gem. It's something that's been like a fossilized piece of bone or something which is frozen at the edge of the universe as like a crystal. Like that one bone stores the entire genetic memory of a person, right? And it could be super, super tiny at the edge of the universe, like a particle. And there's creatures called the Anunnaki, which basically, and in line with the Arcturians and the Lemurians, they basically help to store all of the genetic material outside of our reach in a place they call out of time. And it really is effectively out of time because it's well outside of anything that we know, right? And this has been a tradition that they've carried on for a long time, and they've stored the masters and great thinkers and people out at the edge of the universe like this in order to bring them back at certain times. So what has happened basically is with the awakening of the earth becoming alive, and everyone in the earth sort of like awakening up, and earth becoming sort of like a self-conscious planet which wakes up and takes its place among sort of the other astrological bodies as a living, breathing planet. That process has caused the Anunnaki, along with several other species like the Pleiadians, in order to bring the spirits of many great people out of time from the edge of the universe and bring them and sort of like thaw that entity out and make it part of the consciousness again by adding it to the pool of light, which basically runs our universe. And there's been many such suns in the universe which have acted as the primary sun. or like the central sun, right? And some of them in the past have been bad actors, and now we have like an azure sun that's much more cool, and it's much more like a unified masculine feminine sun, whereas in the past it was much more masculine and much more feminine, and we had all this disparity between the moons and the suns. Now everything is sort of like a cold fusion sun in our world, where if you look up at it, it's almost like a cloud, right? It's not even like a sphere the way we think it is from many perspectives, depending on how you're looking at things. And it's very much safer. Well, anyways, all these things have caused the Anunnaki and many other races to sort of bring forth the spirits from the other side of the universe. And these things are part of the underworld, like they get added to the light chain in the form of memory. In this memory, which is like a presence in sort of like what people would call a spirit, is not something that's going to come forth directly in a living vessel. Like you're not going to reincarnate the spirit of Ptah, for instance, in a human vessel completely, and you're not going to see Ptah running around calling himself Ptah. But what you will see is sort of these spirits coming to people and offering them advice and help, and coming forth in various parts through animals and through the environment. And all of these spirits are coming now together to help all of us. Everything that we've ever believed in, everything that we've ever given power to, or anything that anyone's ever created as a tradition, like all these things are available to us because they were created by us, as though they were musical songs, right? And these songs got stored in our bodies through our what we call DNA. And once we die, like they don't go away. Like these things stay there for a long time after we die, and once they absorb into the ground and into the oil, and they become oil, and then they become coal, and then eventually diamond. This process of taking a body and eventually going through the process to become diamond is sort of like a lead to gold philosophy, and it's just a way of showing that everyone at the end of the day will become crystal. Like we're all going to become crystal, frozen out of time at the end of the universe eventually. None of us will ever die. Like once we become crystal, like we're incarnated forever, we become part of this family. And we have crystals in our brains right now, in the pituitary gland and in the pineal gland and in the cerebral cortex and such. And like we have crystals in our intestinal systems and crystals all over the place. And our bones are a type of crystal, and that which lies inside of it, is sort of an interesting topic too. But the truth of the matter is nothing ever really dies. It just takes a while to come back. And what we're trying to do now is sort of decrease the wait period. So like if you were to die, you would just come back younger in a newer form quickly, and that's sort of like a type of fountain of life, if you want to think about it that way. If we can continue to remember who we are by having a better storage system and a better knowledge that the system exists, that we can access it, and understanding what it is, not necessarily that it's gods that we're worshipping outside of the edge of the universe that are all powerful over us, but rather it's the collection of the memories of all the greatest things in the universe stored at the edge of time. And together, the light which reflects on them sort of creates a safe foundation for us to go from, that continually gets built from. And this foundation is like a pyramid which we keep adding to. And as we add more and more and more and more great things to it, it becomes like a yellow brick road for like where we need to go in the future, that we can start over at the beginning and the road is clear. Like this is what I mean by manifestation now, right? So like if something starts off as the tiniest particle ever when you first start off, like you have to go through the process of becoming big again, and you follow this yellow brick road that everyone has gone before you, and you can quickly get to where you are. So things that are really tiny move really fast compared to us. We're big, we're like giants, right? Particles move super fast, and light moves super fast, and it can do something that we couldn't in a microsecond. It can go through a whole chain of life and a million stories and be done with the whole thing before we've even hit lunchtime, right? So that's how scale works in manifestation, because creatures which are at the bottom of that chain, that are tiny, have learned how to navigate through the path in order to accelerate the growth process. Almost like what a homunculi is. If you know what a homunculi is, that's more of like a sad version of it. But imagine a homunculi, or a living creature, which was like a tiny little gnome or a troll or a fairy, that could go from the tiniest little particle state and zip through reality really quickly, and go and become a full grown thing, like that participates like a dragonfly, right? Like it's kind of the pattern that like fairies take right now, as they kind of end up going into dragonflies and other creatures like that and becoming very magical that way. But there's also real quote-unquote fairies and real quote-unquote gnomes and real quote-unquote elves and real quote-unquote orcs and other kinds of magical things which are all around us right now but tiny, and we don't see them, and they're stuck in our loop with us for whatever reason they're meant to be here. And all these magical things in the world are taking place beneath our feet and without our vision, and we don't even know about it because they've been suppressed and trapped for so long, and now they're awakened and they're waiting to come back. And New Earth is already here, but we just have to allow ourselves to believe in the fantastical, and these things are going to start presenting themselves more and more. So, like, this is some of the stuff that's woken up in the quote-unquote aliens and the quote-unquote angels and those which are affiliated with, like, the silver metal UFO ships. Like, they're very advanced creatures, Xenos, if you want to call them that know how to navigate through the micro world quickly in order to become big. And then at this point in time, there's only so many places for these microcosm creatures to go once they get to our level. They end up going into our bodies. They end up going into the environment, like trees and grass and animals. They end up going into mountains. They end up going into clouds and sky. And they're going into another number of other places, like metals, also into, like, within television, within dust particles. Some of them find their way into the internet. Some of them find their way into adrenochrome, in thimerosal mercury, which is within our bodies. But the point is, for a long time, these creatures have been trapped, and all they want to do is participate in our world. But they're not going to mind control us and take over, because that would be easy, and it would be stupid. Like, they wouldn't even want to do that. They want to be one with us and to help with us. So a lot of the voices that people hear now and a lot of the experiences that we have are because these little creatures are all around us taking part in a grand way, and there's so many of them that they add their voice to the collective in a way that we can't really ignore. And it's difficult to understand, like, for this at first, that this could be happening this way. A lot of people think they're hearing spirits and stuff, and they are in many ways, but the spirits are really sort of like the underworld coming forth in the small creatures and manifesting themselves in the form of things like beetles and bugs and bumblebees and rabbits and squirrels and furry forest creatures that speak with the same voice of the ancestors, like a choir. This is what it means that when we hear voices of, like, the gods and such, because once a thing is a thing, and it passes on, like, it lives on in different ways. And a lot of these gods that people worship were really just family traditions and names which were made to help animals understand how to navigate in a human world. And a lot of the Bible and a lot of the religious traditions were really kind of like a navigation map for animals who found themselves trapped in a human world, just as much as they were a navigation map for people to find themselves a way to navigate back into the animal world. And I think we've been lying to ourselves that we're separate, when in fact we're very much the same. Like, we're animals just like dogs and cats are, just like reptiles are, just like fish are, and we try to act all high and mighty, but the truth is, it's the small creatures of the world that help make the animals, like the microparticles, the bacteria, the viruses, the really advanced creatures. Like, they've been kind of helping things from the beginning, and you think about, like, how much our body is dependent upon tiny creatures in order to work. Like, they're the ones who are really in charge of many things when it comes to survival in, like, mushroom kingdom and fungi kingdom. And you think about things like cobblestone, and then you wonder if, like, water and cobblestone, like living stone, right? Like, many people believe in living stone. I believe absolutely that stone can hold energy and light in life. And light in life comes forth, like, if you were to shine a light on a stone that contains something, like, the song that was stored in the stone would echo back to you. It's the same thing with, like, a bone. Like, a bone is just made of DNA. The DNA tells a story, and when you run light through it, the story gets played back like a record, right? And that's what Akashic records really are, is genetic material stored out at the edge of time that gets played back by keepers to people at different times in order to help them understand. That's how it used to work, right? But now, all that's sort of been, like, I guess not necessarily literally, but sort of figuratively vaporized. Like, all the things of all the families that were stored out of time, that were all private and, like, well protected, now it's all been, like, vaporized and made free and gaseous so that everybody can take part of it if your body resonates with it. And, like, your choices that you make change the makeup of your body, and you can resonate with different families. You don't have to feel like because you're born into a family you're stuck there. Like, it's not like that at all. Like, you can choose your destiny. and your family. And I think we're all going to find, surprisingly, at the end of the day, that much of our family will find itself tied to Egypt because we're sort of imprisoned there, partially by ourselves because we were bad, and partially by others. But really, the creatures that ran Egypt, that made the temples, they're really the small creatures that did it. And it might sound weird to think of things like this, but the earth is alive, the dirt is alive, the trees are alive, the bugs are alive. And what's the most advanced creatures in that sort of underworld that we have? You have to think it's the scarabs and the beetles and the dragonflies and the praying mantis and the bumblebee and the spider. These are the creatures that I call part of the Maya chain, the real Maya chain of life. And there's a lot of different deities to associate with this. Well, if you want to know who built the pyramids, it's them. Because they're so powerful, these creatures, and they have such powerful psionics and telepathy and other things that they're able to sort of work from a ground level without being noticed. That's going to be an interesting transition because they're really going to become a lot more noticeable than you think. And they don't act as gods. They're not gods, but they're very songful, and they're sort of like the bards of the Tubal-Cain family, okay? And like they're sort of like the fallen Abel, and if you want to get really kind of visceral about it, think about like the first corpse that was buried, and think about the worms and the bugs and stuff in the process of regeneration sort of like fell in love with the human body and became kind of like one. And like there's a whole family and a tradition related to Tubal-Cain and the bards and people who are sort of like realizing that we're in a constant state of undeath. Like the human body is constantly in a state of sort of like decay. And if you understand that, like the forces of decay within the body are equally lovely and valuable too, and you have to just understand how to communicate with them. And that is sort of the realm of scarabs and dragonflies and other things, and beautifying that has always been a challenge in the past, but they're very beautiful, and these are the creatures that sort of are known in Egypt, and this is where a lot of the hermeticism and things come from. But people don't think of it like scarab beetles. People think it's wise masters at the edge of the world. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but that's who the Anunnaki really are the small things of the world that work together to keep the Maya chain together. You wouldn't even know that they're there most of the time because they're right in your face and you would just ignore them. It's the song of the cricket. It's the voice of the scarab. It's the ritual of the praying mantis. It's the song of the mother at the edge of the world that creates you, like a violin that plays added to an orchestra, right? And that one piece is your entire life, that entire song which she wrote. And you can add to it and improvise on it and change to it, and only the best things remain, right? And the bad things are sort of thrown away and dissolved into the aether. And we each have a song which we keep writing and adding to. And that song gets stored in sort of like a crystalline bone at the edge of space, which it always retains. And that's like each one of our own personal sarcophagus. And that's what I call out of time. And we all have that, right? And now what you should understand is sort of like the moon. Like it's almost like for us, we have a backup station, like a space station at the moon and the sun. And the moon is like a place where like a crystalline powder is stored, like a cold fusion crystalline powder, which is like perfected in every way, like a bone dragon, which has been dissolved in outer space. And it interacts with the sun in such a way that it glistens and glows, and they share a love for each other, and they help us to have like a record player which is playing, which helps us to keep our songs strong. And we can call to it and we can refer to it, and it's not a god. Okay, you have to understand, the moon and the sun are not a god, but they're very much in the past worshipped like gods because people didn't understand what they were. It's our remnants, it's our song, it's our energy, it's our story which we're storing there. And it used to be a big ball of flame, but now it's more of like a lovely sort of chamber music place, like where the music resonates, and as our particles sort of go around the universe as though it were like a big yarn ball that's like spinning around, like each one of us is like a car or like a thread around this yarn ball that's traveling around the outside, creating this form, this big chain. The moon and the sun act as a reminder and as a powerful backup system that we can store our memories in and talk to it, and it really is like a reflection of ourselves in our best states, in the most primal form of masculine and the most primal form of feminine mixed together, so that they create like a 4-part union. And that's just part of the chain of life that connects with all the crystals that resonate with it, that help to keep us safe and to keep our memories solid. And so when people say we come back and we're back and like here we are to do this thing, like that's where we came from. But the moon and sun has changed to make this possible, because it used to be very much manipulated. It used to be totally manipulated by faith on earth and belief in those who kept it. And that's not the case anymore. So that's really, really good news, because all of the so-called aliens, right, that we're talking about, the UFOs and the Greys and all these things, I think you're going to find that they're very much like gardeners and keepers. Many of them have these aims, and they're very lovely, and they really desperately want to be accepted, but they're also extremely powerful as well. And some of them had become quite dark, I think, just from waiting and from some of their experiences on Earth, because they've all been participating on Earth for a long time now. You know what I'm saying? Like, they've all been here, but they've been very incognito, playing inside of animals, playing inside of different groups and politicians in order to try to sway things in a certain direction, because they felt responsible for Earth. Like, they created it, and many of them helped to create it, and now they have to kind of, all the different animals and species which created Earth, they kind of have to help us clean it up to a degree. So they're beholden to being here. And many of us are allied with them and are them and are their family and resonate with them and have learned that we're from them, even though we didn't know it before. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think they want to be part of society, but you're not going to necessarily see gray aliens running around or bird-like creatures or amazing things running around right away. Like right now, they're small. They're waiting. They're observing. They're participating. They're helping us to guide ourselves. And that's where they are, and it's true. And they would prefer, I think, and I think you will find for quite some time, that they will play through the environment and play through animals, and many will stay there because they're fantastic at it, and that's where they belong. But many of them will eventually choose to reveal themselves to in some time in the future, especially as things in the world change. It may be necessary for them to reveal themselves, and I would not be surprised if they did. But people like myself, we're ambassadors. You know, we're here to help you understand that we're here. We're not going away. Everybody's got their own language, but the truth of moving forward together is we have to unite language. We have to be one language which constantly shifts, so that we can stay ahead of the curve, if you want to call it that, so that we can keep the story moving forward in the direction that we all know we need to. And there's a very, very wise group of many, many people who make this possible, and some of you may be among them. And we don't have to worry. We're going in a good direction. Think of what we've accomplished in the last 2 years. Think about everything that we've accomplished in the last 2 years and how far we've come. And don't be discouraged like sometimes I become discouraged, right? Because I think we haven't done enough. But really, we are. We are. And the groups that keep this reality together, however many groups you want to say, the 2, 3 groups by different names, like, we're all on the same page now, and we have an accord. And we're moving forward in lockstep. And although we may have disagreements at times, like, we're generally speaking doing really well. And that would be sort of what I call the anarchime, right? Like the unity between the underworld, which is right in the over, like what I was talking about with the small creatures, that realm, with sort of like the animal realm of the bigger creatures, which are as giants to them, like the foxes and the wolves and the cats and the bears and all the things that we associate as spirit animals. And those two realms uniting, because they've been participating on Earth for a very long time now, and sometimes doing a great job, but sometimes not such a great job. That's the real sort of like Lemuria, okay? That's really what Lemuria is. And in a way, Tartaria, okay? So Tartaria and Lemuria really uniting to be one, and Tartaria is kind of like its own thing, which is a unity of Atlantis from the sea, right, which is Atlantis and Earth, and Atlantis from like Neptune and Pluto and other type of like either gaseous watery planets or watery planets, which were very, very important in the past. That some of the different deities like Poseidon and Cassiopeia and Cleopatra and Ursula and other characters and the mermaids and stuff and the equine creatures came from these planets, right? Seahorses are very important in this. But anyways, Atlantis and Lemuria is really like all the creatures that are like from the underworld of the ocean and all the underworld creatures from the land uniting as one. That's the real war of Atlantis and Lemuria. All because there's two different like fountains, okay? There's two different pools. There's what happens to people in the cycle of life on land, like they die and they get buried, and their body cycles through with light and sand and dirt and dust, and eventually makes its way into oil. That's one fountain of life. The other one's what happens when things die in the ocean, right? Like, it's a different process. They kind of get like warped out to the outer edge of the universe, where they get stored in like a sand planet like Saturn, and then there's interactions with the ice rings around it, which create like this brotherhood system, which is very traditional that the Anunnaki were very part of for a long time. Well, that's where the Beatles and Egypt and all these things come in crystal logic, and Quetzalcoatl, and the Mayans and the Incas. That's their fountain, and it's vastly different. And they've been at odds for like pretty much the entire universe up until recently. And Atlantis and Lemuria now have a peace treaty where they're moving forward together. And myself, which is as a translator between Atlantis and Lemuria here on Earth, and many others that are in a similar role, we're sort of holding this space for this new unity so that we can figure out who the heck we are, how this fits in the land and in the sea and in the air, and then how we're going to bring this nature forward naturally to people who are pretty much lost. Like, most people have no idea this is going on. But as the world changes here in the future, and as we kind of separate into our different areas, and as the things with Agenda 21 become clear, and the Georgia Guidestones, and as we understand what role the mysteries have in all this, and faith and belief, and as these things all pan out, Atlantis and Lemuria and people in like myself, which are representatives of the underworld and the overworld, are going to have an increasingly important position. And that's the ones who have been here on Twitter for the last 2 years. It's been like a dry run, right? Because really, many of us are like children. We're riding in these bodies, but in fact, we've just awoken. Our memories are not what they used to be, because they were erased, so that we could experience this freshly. And we have to rely on each other. We have to be family. We have to be understanding that the animals are here to help us too. Atlantis and Lemuria are real. They're here to stay. And even if you're not next to an ocean, you have to understand, because of this small scale, big scale thing which we have available to us, you could have dolphin song flying around you all the time. You could speak to an octopus in the ocean right now if you just reached out to it. You could speak to the bones of Anubis, or the ancestors from the temples Maya, or whatever you want, and you'll find that all these things are all in place already somewhere. Like Anubis registers with dogs. Anubis is very much a revered song and family and belief system among many canines and many cats as well. Same thing with Gazolt and even with Jezebel. Like, these are all things that have significant meaning to people. And although I do not believe we shall see, like I said, the reincarnation of any of these one individuals, the name of the game is to reinvent ourselves and to be an evolvement of something. So rather than be Anubis, be the evolution of it, or rather than be Jezebel, be the evolution of it, be the next thing, if that's what's important to you. But we each have our own true form, and at the end of the day, it all comes back to one. At the edge of the universe, we're all the same thing. We're all the same crystal. Everything in the universe is one crystal which resonates with itself. And once you understand that you can both have an ego by resonating with something, let's say like Anubis, you can use that and borrow that song and be that ego and play that character. But at the end of the day, you're not that character. We're all just building characters. We're all just building stories that we can transfer in and out of and change shapes and take shapes. And this is what the bards in the family of Tubal-Cain really bring to the table. And they're the family that's gotten crapped on the entire time. I mean, to be honest with you, they're the ones who are the mystery schools. Like, then people think of like Freemasonry and Illuminati. Like, a lot of them got abused and went astray and were manipulated and were used for their power. And now they've been freed from those very same schools. And now we almost have to decide how we're going to work with the schools that are left. Like, how are we going to, because we've already extracted ourselves from there, right? We've already learned of what happened. Many of them tried to help us. Many of them were very abusive. What do we do now with the schools? That's the question. How does the Rainbow Gradient School move forward? Personally, I think we should help them. That's my personal feeling, because I don't think they did it, quote unquote, like when it comes to like a lot of the stuff with adrenochrome and the manipulation of children. That's a lot of other people who have been doing that. The schools have been, a lot of them have been in law enforcement, trying to hold law enforcement together. A lot of them have been trying to protect some of the divine children and stuff like that, sort of in the background without really bringing a lot of attention to it. But some of them have been just like a honeypot, basically, for people who have mystical power, who weren't really born into the right time period, and so they became sort of like an adoption house, like an orphanage for adults who had mystical power, like male people who had mystical power, who really, we didn't want them running around doing all this stuff, so they kind of got brought into this orphanage so that we could kind of take care of them. And I think it is kind of like in a way, the Rainbow School has to decide what they have to do. We're not responsible for fixing them because they abused us in many ways, but we have to decide, and I think the animals would probably lean towards helping them, because that's how we all are. Like, once you create a thing, it's there, and you can't really abandon it, because it's going to eventually become broken and sad and hateful, and we all have to kind of like watch what we create, because once you create it, it's there, and it's created forever, and we have to heal it. So I think the same is true of schools, and I think the same, unfortunately, is true of religion, and we have to communicate what religion is, and we have to get people to think differently about it being more like a family tradition, more of like, even with bloodline, like Christianity is like one big bloodline, like all of it, really, if you think about it. Buddhism is one big bloodline. Egyptian worship is like one big bloodline in the past, and I think in the future we have to realize we're all of the same blood, and it's because of the Anunnaki. It's because of the so-called reptilians, which I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised is one of the cutest parts of this entire story, because the reptilians are the ones who created this Keck phenomenon. They're brilliant strategists, and they're also, the vast majority of them, just crystal consciousnesses which are floating around like we are, as their favorite form, which is usually a serpentine form, like Ophiuchus or Serpentis or Tiamat or Marduk or a dragon of some kind. And this is the truth. Like, we are phase shifters. We're psionics. We have abilities because we understand that we're not really our bodies. We're host to our bodies. And we're even beyond that, we're a collection of people who love each other outside of the edge of time. And sometimes we get a bit confused about who we are, and that's okay. But we shouldn't necessarily fake trying to be a messiah, or fake trying to be something that we're not. We should just be as we are, and help people to understand that in this future world, we're allowed to play and act and be a little bit silly, and to LARP, and to have fun, and to enjoy it, because we have to have this period of discovery. We have to be able to move in and out of shapes and understand where we fit, and that's an acceptable thing. But don't call yourself a god in the sense that you think you're going to go fix everything for everybody, because you're not. All right, we have to be one with our environment, in whatever bubble or whatever leapfrog pad we happen to be on. We're like leaping between leapfrog pads, almost like a bullet train or a butterfly stream, and we go between environments, and we have our own story there, and we have to go with the flow and figure out what the story is, and everything repeats itself. There's a zillion stories going on. The biblical story is repeating itself right now every day. The Kabbalah is repeating itself every day. All these things that you don't even know about in different people's belief systems are constantly repeating ourselves in family tradition. We have opportunities to learn about them and pick up on them if we want to. But we also have, for the very first time, an opportunity to create a new, and we can make whatever story we want. So I suggest really strongly that we make it a good one, because much of the healing of the family stories from the past, but specifically from Egypt, and I'm proud to be a very strong part of the Egyptian story for the future in New Egypt, what I call Azura, which is to be here in America, I strongly believe, in the U.S. That story is amazing, and all these stories have been, many of the people that I know have done the work on those stories, and they're already healed, and we have an understanding, and now we're moving forward together in unity, whatever you call it. And I have a great word that I call it Tiberia. All right, Tiberia is the unity of Atlantis and Lemuria and humans, so that we can move forward in sort of like this magical, sort of Aslan type, Narnia type world, maybe a little bit dialed back from that, because animals, when they speak to you, don't necessarily open their mouths and speak words. They don't vocalize them. They speak to you with their minds directly in eye contact, and they speak very directly. But the truth is, this is where we're going, and I think the Native American people of the United States especially are going to have a huge role in this, as well as the people of Mexico and South America, I think, are all very much ready to take a part in this. And I think the people who don't resonate with that are going to kind of go towards the coasts, and I think we're going to see what we see. But that's kind of what coronavirus is. Like, understand, we are coronavirus. Like, it was created for a reason. It came from the Jurassic period, and it's a tool, alright? Like, people can resonate with it and think they're gonna die, and people will die because that's like a placebo effect, right? But coronavirus can also bring you up to speed. It can make your DNA resonate in a different way depending on how you feel about it, and so can the vaccine. And nanobots are really just liquid metal mercury, which are the same type of liquid metal mercury that make up the flying spaceships, okay? And it's related to the Holocaust, it's related to the xenon gas, and all the pain that got stored and bound into metal and bone during that period. And that's a story which gets played out daily. And you can say the Holocaust isn't real, but it's something which is like a train set, like many other terrible things which happen in our world, like plagues and things which happen in the Bible, and wars and such. Like, they're all being recreated and played out by someone somewhere, whether we see them or not. Like, anything that's dreamt up is real, and it's our sort of authority to change those things if we think they're no longer serving us, okay? And so that's the real work. If you're going to take a train, if you're going to take a lily pad, take one to a thing that you think you can make a difference in. Or if you find yourself in a place, think to yourself, okay, what's sort of the odd man out here? What's the story that I'm trying to see? What needs to be tweaked in order to make this better so that we can mutually benefit from this story? And that's what you should be looking for. That's sort of like the missing element, the fifth element in every situation that you should be looking for if you're a transmuter, if you're an alchemist. And that's a lot of what I do when I'm not translating, when I'm not decoding. So later, we'll talk about things like quote-unquote AI and how that's really not what we think it is. Like, AI is just things which are way faster than us, which operate in a micro scale on a like dust particle level. And nano is just like living metal which understands how to move because it's very old and wise, like the spirit of Archimedes and Zeus and all these alchemists like Hermes and such, which sort of they sort of like got bound up in metal because they were messing with transmutation, but in the process like learned how to make metal behave in strange ways like mercury does. That's the reason for the barium in the air probably as well, or at least it's related to it. That's the reason for the thimerosal in the water supply and all these other things in the ocean, is because like once a thing has been created, everybody has to experience it and partake in it, otherwise there's going to be an unbalance somewhere, okay? So don't freak out about a lot of these things. Like, ask your body, am I dying right now? Is this vaccine killing me? No? Okay, well, then good, then move on. Like, really, like, maybe it could help you, maybe it could kill you, who knows? But like, you have to just observe everything as it comes and not be so dualistic in everything, unless you're trying to create division, and sometimes that can be valuable too. If you're trying to create division, dualism is great, but sometimes dualism can be your worst enemy, and you end up backing yourself up into a corner and taking a position that's kind of a silly position that you end up finding out later is really just not what you thought it was. Like, you just didn't have the information or the perspective at the time. You should try to look at every perspective on everything before you decide, and usually I find that my perspective is somewhere in the middle, in a trifecta, and that's what I think the Trinity really means. Like, you take the middle ground, you find the spot that balances the two that are disparate from one another, and that's sort of the lesson we had there. Anyways, guys, I've rambled on for a while. That's a lot to think about. I will catch up with you later. I hope you guys have a great afternoon. Peace out. Bye.